I think that it is so important that you are creating content that keeps your listener in mind, that is really geared towards them. Otherwise, you're going to lose them.
Hi, and welcome to the Creative Solutions Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. On the show, you'll hear interviews with innovative creative artists, entrepreneurs, business executives, and thought leaders. You'll have a front row seat as they explore their internal motivations that inspire them to grow, achieve, and innovate. Get their insights and realizations as I tease out answers to questions they've never even pondered before. This episode is brought to you by my upcoming book, Get Booked, a performer's guide to working with booking agents in the gig economy. Are you ready to thrive in gigs, big or small? Start with my Nailing Your Holiday Gigs checklist, your ultimate guide to crushing the holiday season. Grab it in the show notes and mark your calendar. The book drops January 2025. Get ready to go pro, book smarter, and own the gig economy. And now, let's get on with the show. Hey there, and welcome to the Creative Solutions Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here and to listen. Accept my apologies right now because my voice is, I have scent allergies. I've talked on this show about this before. My neighbors have decided this non-smoking building is no longer non-smoking, so I'm coming to you stuffed up, and I believe in being honest, so there you go. But I'm going to be incredibly excited and am incredibly excited to share this week's guest with you, Alesia Galati. I'm going to call her your podcast guru extraordinaire. With a passion ignited in 2015, she's the mastermind behind over 50 captivating podcasts for coaches and thought leaders. If you need a stress-free launch, she's going to have you covered with her foolproof system. And when she's not crafting audio magic, you're going to find her soaking up the North Carolina sun with her husband and her 2 adventurous kids. Fun fact, Alesia's bookworm status is legendary, devouring over 200 books yearly. I haven't done that since I was 10. Tune in to hear her favorite picks and podcasting wisdom today. Alesia, thank you so much for being on the show. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. You know what? I might need to steal that bio because you just judged the heck out of mine. So thank you for that. I might need to steal that.
I will send it to you after the show.
Perfect.
All righty, cool. Well, I'm so glad that you were able to take the time to be here because podcasting obviously is a shared passion of ours, but you've taken it to the next step. You help other people do this. You help them tell their stories in this not new, but really in some ways still in development way of telling their stories. And let's just jump on in. What inspired you to jump into podcasting as a means to establish industry leadership, and how has it impacted, how has podcasting impacted your entrepreneurial journey and your business trajectory?
So I usually start with I listened to my first podcast in 2016 while I was driving or actually 15, when I was driving my newborn son, or maybe he was about a year old, back and forth to his babysitter. And I was sick of hearing the same 3 songs over the
Mhm.
radio. But in retrospection, and honestly, I really discovered this in the last year, is my desire to share voice happened a lot more before that.
Hmm.
If anyone follows me, I grew up in a cult. But for those new listeners who are like, wait, no, I've never heard about you. I grew up in a cult, and it was best way I think I can describe it is fundamental Christian
Hmm.
cult. And my mom was an addict, went to a women's program that was supposed to be 18 months long. It ended up being 10 years that
Wow.
we were there. And if you know anything about cults, you know that they are very much like the leader is the only voice. The leader is the only voice that matters. The adult's voice matters even less, and the children's voice doesn't matter at all. And in growing up that way, once I left and kind of had to rediscover and reimagine who is Alesia, voice felt really scary and it felt really daunting. And I kind of backed into podcasting,
Hmm.
not really realizing that this, because of how I grew up, that this is something that I am so, so very passionate about. And that is putting people's voices out into the world who have historically and systemically been underrepresented in
Mm-hmm.
voice.
Mm-hmm.
As a woman,
Sure.
like it is so impactful to be able to listen to podcasts. And even the first few podcasts I listened to were almost exclusively men. And then finding women who were speaking about business, who were speaking about motherhood, who were speaking about the things that mattered to me, honestly changed my life.
Hmm.
Because I was just new out of the cult and was just new trying to figure out who in the world I was, and being able to hear other people's perspectives, other people's ideas really allowed me to do a lot of self-work in my journey to here and now. But listened to my first podcast 2015, launched my first podcast in 2018 that was about helping e-commerce businesses be able to pretty much monetize and do marketing better. My background is in supply chain and manufacturing. And I thought, why not be able to bring that aspect to podcasting? Because I love this medium. Being able to record in my pajamas or being able to record without having to show my face just felt really safe. And then in 2019, my mom passed away due to an overdose.
Mm.
And my sister and I decided to launch our podcast called Two Sisters and a Cult. It has since pod faded, but you can go and listen to episodes where we talk about different cults and how it relates to our story. And then we ended the kind of show with sharing about our story and our perspective and how we grew up. And what I realized with that podcast was one, how therapeutic being able to externally process our trauma and see that we're not alone in our trauma, how therapeutic that was. Also, to be able to ask and answer questions that we could no longer ask or get answers from our mom.
Mm.
And then also, third, the community that rallied around us with this topic of not just, oh, it's a true crime show, but it's a podcast from cult survivors who are talking about cults and dissecting them in a way that you typically don't see, because usually it's from a point of fascination, not
Mm.
a point of, oh, that's very similar to how I grew up, or this makes sense. And it's all kind of coming together. And so we had people reaching out and saying, oh my goodness, I grew up in a cult too, or oh my goodness, I had a similar experience. And it just kind of a light bulb moment for me of, wow, podcasting can be so impactful and it can make such a difference, not just in my own life, but in other people's lives who are listeners or even people who are creating podcasts. So I decided in early 2020, I was going to be shifting my kind of helping e-commerce businesses into podcasting because I love the medium. I love creating it. I know everything that goes into it. So I've already done two successful ones. Let me throw my hat into the ring and try to be a producer. COVID happened. I lost my job due to that and getting laid off. I am also the sole financial provider for my family. My husband
Mm.
is a stay-at-home dad and absolutely loves what he does. He homeschools our kids. I could never do that. I have no interest in doing that. I love to work. So it felt kind of like the universe nudging me off the ledge to do the dang thing. So I reached out to some friends that I had met over the course of my time in digital marketing and said, "Hey, I'm looking to launch a podcast for someone. See if I can replicate these results, see if I can replicate this." And I have to say, that person who took the chance on me is still with us today,
Awesome.
with her podcast and still has her show. So, yeah, that's kind of my journey into the podcasting space.
I think that's so fascinating. Obviously, the cult aspect of it, and feeling disempowered and sort of purposefully subdued by someone else from using your voice, from speaking up. It is such a powerful statement to you as a person that you went, not only am I going to tell my story, but I'm going to help other people tell theirs, because psychologically you could have gone a completely different direction. And that's something that I really want to point out, that it's a testament to you and your strength of character that this is the direction you took. Having said that, so I'm a child abuse survivor myself. I was never in a cult. I just had an abusive father, but this notion of no, I'm gonna have my say, and now I'm gonna help other people have their say. Can you talk a little bit about that process for you, and also how you help other people? Because not everyone has confidence to tell their story. How do you
Mhm.
help them change their mindset so that they can, in addition, because I have a feeling you do that, in addition to all of the nuts and bolts of producing a podcast, how do you do the internal part of it? And how do you help your clients with that?
Yeah. So, first question, I would say that it really came down to just showing up for me.
Mm,
Of, all right, I'm going to, and I think that what made it easier to process my trauma and my grief and my all these things was to be able to tell other people's stories first
mm,
and then work my way into feeling confident to tell my own.
mm-hmm,
And I think I take a very similar approach to how working when I work with my clients on telling their stories. Most people who start a podcast, they want to have an interview podcast first. They are scared to share their voice. They're scared to talk about what it is that they do or how they help people. And especially the business owners that we work with, a lot of them are like, well, I just want to make connections in space. And like, yeah, but you can also sell with your podcast. Like your listeners are most likely going to be there for you. And so I usually will like, here's 10 ideas of potential podcast episodes that you could do to be able to showcase your expertise. And I think one thing that also kind of sets us apart as a production company is that we listen to every word.
mm,
If you were to outsource your podcast to, I mean, a lot of people are outsourcing it to the Philippines, but they're going to be looking for, most production companies are going to be looking for the ums, the ers, the false starts, those kinds of things.
mm,
Whereas we are digging in and saying, does this joke land right? Is this statement aligned with the host's values? That is what we're editing for, keeping the listener in mind and keeping the host's values in mind. So we have had clients literally in the middle of an episode say, oh, no, so and so. So my team, it's myself, Jess, and Sarah, and they'll say, oh, Jess, take that out. Or Jess, I think I want to say that differently. Or, oh my God, Jess, my cat just jumped on my lap. Give me a second. And they'll literally talk because they know that there's somebody listening. And I think that that's really what stops a lot of people from getting a podcast or doing a podcast is that they're like, who's going to listen? But we guarantee someone is going to be listening. And I think that that really helps them feel more at ease to be
mm,
able to share their message. But then we do talk through during the strategy sessions, we'll talk through, all right, well, this is what you've been talking about. Can we add more personality in there? What about you? What are some stories you can share that are relevant to your audience that are going to help them be able to connect with you on a deeper level? And then additionally, showing them the stats because every single time that we have had a client say, "Oh, let me test out a solo episode and see how it does," every time those solo episodes have outperformed the guest episodes. And it's just a testament to say the numbers are not lying here. Your audience wants to hear from you. Please let them hear from you. So those are a few things that we do to kind of work through that fear that really happens when you're putting your voice out there.
And first of all, I love that. And I will say famously, I do not edit a word. I had a Grammy Award winning musician on my show, and his dog was in the studio with him while we were doing our interview. And the dog in the middle of our interview threw up, and he said, "You're not going to leave." Oh, yes, I am. I am absolutely going to. And that episode is actually quite popular. So there are different ways to do this. And because I'm a
Yes.
one woman show and I do my own, I get to make those decisions. And so when you're working with your clients, those kinds of decisions, I imagine you help guide them towards best practices. But I'm gonna turn it around a little bit and ask you, what are some of the biggest challenges your clients face as far as not just telling their story, but building perhaps their businesses, if they're, especially if they're entrepreneurs? And how do you help them overcome those hurdles?
Yeah. Right now, it's really interesting as content creators and podcasters. This whole social media game
Mm,
has been really really interesting for us in the last year or so. And it's gotten really difficult. And so trying to find out of the box ways to push our clients is downloads, their conversions, all of that stuff has been really important to us. And I would say one thing that they really struggle with is, all right, well, if people are listening, cool, but like what's working, what's not? A lot of them are usually just wanting more industry stuff of what's working.
Mm,
And I tend to go the approach of what can we actually like do, right? Like what are the things that we can do as people to do better rather than having to rely on an algorithm or rely on our listeners. So that usually goes back to SEO, right? Making sure that your podcast is optimized for search engines, which we do, making sure that all of the information in your show notes is in there correctly and how it needs to be, making sure that you are pitching yourself to be on other people's podcasts. That's not a service that we offer, but we definitely push our clients to do that because hand over fist, we've seen clients double and triple their downloads just from being a guest on other people's shows. So it is absolutely paramount if you're looking to grow your audience or get in front of new people. And then making sure that they're strategic with the types of guests that they're getting. That is where it's kind of like a two-edged sword, and you'll be able to attest to this as well. I'm sure those guests that are really, really popular sometimes don't do as well as those ones who have a really engaged following, even if it's
mm,
smaller.
hmm.
I don't know if you've seen that at all, have you?
Oh, yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah. So like not always going after those big names, but making sure that the content we're creating keeps that listener in mind and always keeping them at the forefront. But then going back to, okay, where does this podcast actually land in my funnel? Is it something that I want to people to pay for? Is it a private podcast? Is it a podcast that needs to be seasonal because life, right? Like we go through all of that stuff as well to ensure that one, it makes sense for your listeners, but first and foremost, it makes sense for you as someone who's creating the content
Mm.
very consistently. And so, what does that look like? And so, I hope that answers your question.
It does, but it's interesting because in that moment when I'm hearing you say, we're going to have to look at all of these different things, that's part of it for me, but part of it, what you said early on in your answer is so true with respect to the really sort of, I guess I would say, ubiquitous guests, people who are on a lot of
Mhm.
shows, because often I find that they tell a lot of the same stories, right? So if you've seen
Yeah.
John Lee Dumas if you've heard him on a podcast, he's probably going to be talking about pretty much the same stuff on another podcast. And the same with people like Gary Vaynerchuk.
Hmm.
They're going to be talking the same, they're going to have the same talking points, no matter what they're talking about or who they're talking about or where they are, they're going to have the same. So when you're dealing with
Yeah.
your clients and and doing that, like I generate my list of questions, and I like that you said that you liked the bio that I wrote up for you, and that's because I like to get into the questions of things. And so I do a lot of research and all of that. When you're working with your clients, how does that part of it work? Especially if they're doing an interview podcast, how does the flow of the actual interview, how much do you help them with that? And how do you help shape it so that their interviews are perhaps different or set themselves apart, even if they do have what I'm calling a ubiquitous guest?
Yeah. So a lot of that really does rely on the host being a good interviewer. And that is something that we definitely think comes with time.
Mm,
Most people, when you launch a podcast for the first time, you're not going to have the right questions or be on point. And as you continue, you'll realize, oh, I don't really feel like I need to go that route. But when it comes to a launch, we will typically guide people on how we recommend they take the direction of the podcast,
mm,
really keeping in mind who is the listener, what is it that they want to know in order to get the most out of the guests that they have on the show, and really to push back that if a conversation doesn't land right, blame it on us that we lost the audio. Like I
mm,
am a-okay with that. I think that it is so important that you are creating content that keeps your listener in mind, that is really geared towards them. Otherwise, you're going to lose them. So often I've seen this happen where people will kind of go in a direction that doesn't align with their followers anymore, or their listeners anymore.
Mm,
And podcast listeners are fickle. They don't
mm,
really will move on if they feel like the content doesn't match what they're used to or what they
mm,
have come to expect. So
mm,
if you do go a different direction, being very clear with your audience, hey, this is why, and this is why it's important to you. And then if you are shifting your podcast, let people know, like let your listeners know, and then let them self-select out if they decide to. But we generally help with just the overview. And then once
mm,
it comes down to the brass tacks of it and like getting the actual content out, we will rearrange things if we need to. Like I said, cut things out that don't align. That's really good in election years, especially.
mm.
And then if the guest says something that is like completely unaligned with the values of the host, then we'll make sure that we take out that bit.
Yeah, I mean, that makes so much sense to me. As someone who doesn't edit, I always have to watch myself and sort of self-edit in the moment. But what's interesting to me, like for example, when anybody pitches me and I get a bunch of pitches every day to be on the show, I let them know that if you are going to come on my show, 60% of what you say needs to be for my audience. 30% can be sort of a little bit self-serving, and 10%, yeah, let's connect you and I as people. And I do that because I want everybody to understand that we're serving my audience first. But when you're
Yeah.
doing this and you're working with your clients, Alicia, what key elements do you focus on so that when you're managing a client's podcast, you can make sure that it's going to connect with their audience and save them time at the same time?
That is where market research comes in very heavily. That is something that
Mm,
we do for every single podcast we have. And we do updated market research every year for our clients. So, like I said, the person who's been with us from the very beginning is still with us. And most of our clients have been with us upwards of 2 years. So, every year they will get updated market research. What is happening in the industry, not just podcasting specific, but also with the podcast similar to theirs. How are
mm,
things shifting and changing? Where can they really fill the gap of what the listeners need in those areas? And then making sure that we're giving updated, here are some topics that you have not talked about that we feel would be really pertinent to this listener because we've identified that person and we're very clear about who that is. Being able to give them resources that they can say, oh, okay, this is a good topic. I can definitely riff off of this. But I recently had someone reach out to work with us and they were like, well, do you help with scripting? I was like, I am not an expert in your topic.
mm,
There's no way that I am going to be able to script something that's going to land for your audience. It's going to land with your expertise because I'm not an expert in that. And I do not feel comfortable or confident in AI to be able to produce something that is a script for you. So, no, that is not a service we offer. But once you have the conversation, if it isn't flowing or you need to move things around, then we're there to help and support with that. And I think that just that ease of being able to go into the interview and sometimes let it flow
hmm.
however it needs to can help clients feel more comfortable and confident as interviewers because it really is just a conversation between them and someone else with the audience in mind.
You're singing my song. I love that so much. You said something that I'm kind of, oh yes, about the actual conversation. Yes, that's part of it. But for me, and this is one of those things where when people see me, they see my very, very big shotgun mic and they go, "Ooh, I want a mic like that because I want to sound like you, Isolde." And I'm like, "Oh, yay, that's great." But there's something here, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because as you were talking about this conversation, I saw at Lincoln Center the production of Uncle Vanya with Steve Carell and Alfred Molina and various other people yesterday. And the sound, the audio engineering of it was pitch perfect. When they wanted you to hear a pin drop, you heard a pin drop. When they wanted you to hear the emotion in a sigh from 200, 300 feet away, you heard it perfectly. And
Mm.
that when you were talking about these conversations that people have, in order to make them sound as conversations, first, yes, there's a lot of prep that goes involved, but there's the audio engineering part of it and the production part of it, but also the brass tacks. What does your space look like? What does your microphone do for you and the other person? Can you talk a little bit about that facet of it as a production company? If somebody shows up and they're like, I've got my earbuds, and you're going, okay, now we have to do this. What is the process that you go through, A, to coach your clients and their guests on sounding as good as they possibly can? And then how do you massage the production on the in post to make sure that those episodes sound as well as they possibly can?
Yeah, this has definitely been a science that we have explored, especially as I started to, yes, I'd done interviews before, but as I started to navigate being the guide for my clients and being able to let them know, hey, this is what you want to do, this is best practices. And the majority of them do care about the audio, which I think really helps me a lot
Yay.
because then I'm not harping on something that is not a value for them, right? But
Mhm.
might be a value for me. So making sure of that fact of like, how much do you care about this? Okay, that's how much time and effort we're going to invest in this. And we have processes in place where when someone is booked to be a guest on the show, some of our clients have a button that says, yes, I will show up with headphones, making sure that they do have those headphones so there's not that reverb or that echo in the audio.
Mhm.
Some clients will send additional, here are best practices, make sure that you're in a quiet space. I've even had clients tell someone, oh, well, this is happening in the background of your thing, or you're expecting a package. Let's reschedule for another time to
Mhm.
ensure that I can get your best here because I want to, and you can frame it this way, right? I want to be able to allow you to show up as your best. And so that's what I need from you. Please make sure that next time that we meet, I just that you have all that attention on this conversation so we can make sure you sound awesome. If we do have a struggle, right? If we have a guest who we've had this where it's an international guest, maybe the internet's a little wonky, we will run things. We have several systems that we've invested lots of money in. Isotope RX is one that works very well to be able to fix and kind of help with the audio solution. Auphonic is one that's very affordable for people that we also use. And that helps with if, especially if you have people who are maybe more soft spoken or microphones that are low. And then there's laughing parts, and you just want to make sure that none of it blows out the person's eardrums who's
Mhm.
listening, or that they are being heard when they're more soft spoken. This equalizes all of that, but also has some additional tools for reverb, which is like that echoey, I'm in a big hall space
Mhm.
sound, or any of those other issues or background noises. I mean, we've had clients that are in New York City where they don't have spaces like you do, and they're literally in a co-working. They've got noises behind them. One of our clients very religiously has her dog with her and
Mhm.
has hardwood floors, which means that her dog click clacks. And
Mm.
so we will make sure we take that out to make sure that there's a good audio experience because she has a lot of listeners and just making sure that they can focus on the conversation rather than the dog in the background. So those are some of the ways that we kind of either coach clients through or fix it in post production if we need to.
I'm so glad that you said that, even though I fly in the face of that every single time I put out an episode. However, something you said earlier, no, I do. I admit it. One of the things that I decided along when the show got into podcasting for dummies, it got into it's featured in the slice of life section. And it turns out my audience likes it. If the dog vomits all over the place, they're like, yeah, give us more. So, hey, I'm willing to do that for sure. But there's something that you said that I think is so interesting. You were talking about, oh, if you're expecting a package or whatever, let's reschedule. And I thought as you were saying that, I'm like, you know what? The thing for me is that if you're present, if you're not expecting a package, if you're not going, oh, I have to wash the dishes or oh, I have to pick my kid up from school or whatever it is, you can be more available to have the conversation. So I feel like that part of it holds true, not just for the physical aspects, but also for having a better conversation to begin with. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have someone who's going to be on my show in September, I want to say, of 2024, for whenever you're listening to this, where she's going to be talking about how to be more present, especially if you have ADHD or if your mind is just really distracted on a lot of things.
Mm,
And I have to say, this is a like physically, she talks about like leaning forward, doing like having something in your hand so that you're not fidgeting with your hair or fidgeting where the camera is, especially if you're on camera, leaning forward to just like tell your body, hey, we're here, we're in
mm-hmm,
this moment,
mm-hmm,
but also being self-aware enough to if you need to write notes, then write notes as the person's talking. If you need to pause and think about it, then tell them at the beginning, hey, I really want to be able to make the most of this conversation. At some point, I might need to pause and think about an answer. Is that okay? Or do you want me to just riff off the cuff? Like, what do you expect in this conversation? And having
mm-hmm,
that communication open really helps, not just the host be able to show up better and not feel like, oh, well, they're not really here, but also allows you to show up better. I mean, I have had guests where every time I started talking, she started looking at her phone. And mine is a video podcast. And
Yikes.
I felt so disrespected.
Sure.
This person is a very popular person. She has had a book coming out. She's done all these incredible things, but she was not here for the conversation. And
Mm,
I felt like I was carrying the conversation, which doesn't happen a lot. Usually it's very conversational and fun, and the vibe is good, but this one was just really difficult.
mm,
And it didn't leave a good taste for me. I wasn't excited about promoting it. I'm not even sure if she promoted it. Like, that doesn't make for quality content for my audience. So having that line of communication open at the front end of like, here's what's I have going on, or here's how what I need to be able to be present, or even as hosts, maybe we can ask the question, is there anything that you need from me in order to show up as your best self during this conversation? Is there any direction you don't want to take? I know that's a question that you have in your intake form, and
mm-hmm.
I love it. I think that it's such a great way to show that you genuinely care about the conversation and that you're willing to shift things if need be to accommodate the guest. And so those are some things I would consider.
And I love them all. I think that's awesome. You know, and it's interesting. One of the things that will sometimes happen in the middle of conversations when I'm hosting is that I will take a moment and I will say, you know, I have embraced the pause. I've listened to everything you've said, and I need to take a second and I need to synthesize what you've just said because I want the conversation to remain exciting and compelling and engaged. But if I just, then I'll just, and it won't really
Yeah.
go anywhere. But there is, to me, this notion of fatigue, right? I feel like we have so much coming at us at all times that we have to be very selective about what we're putting our attention on. Otherwise, it's just too much. And so when you're doing this work, which to me is sacred work because you're helping people tell their stories, how do you focus on the important stuff?
Mm. I think it comes with a lot of practice and having worked with our clients so long, I think that really, I know them in and out. I know all their stories. I know all of, like, I am an avid listener to their show. And I think that that really helps me be able to be present in it, but then also understanding my own capacity. And that's why I have a team, understanding my own capacity to be able to show up well, that we have distributed the clients in a way that no one person has two of the same industry so that
Mm,
things stay alive and fresh and exciting for our team and also for myself because I still edit. I'm still in the weeds. I think that it's really important that I am. That way I
mhm.
can keep a pulse on what is going on. But yeah, I think that that really helps me stay present and then having space away, right? So I am very grateful that I have an office in my house. Like one of the
Mm-hmm.
bedrooms is an office. Even though my husband, yes, he homeschools our kids and they're like literally out in the living room right now. If I need to do an interview or if I need to batch record, I will tell them, hey, look, this is what my schedule looks like. I need focus time to be able to do this. Or, hey, I need to edit this podcast. I can't watch the boys while you work out because I need to be focused on what I'm doing now. But so having that separation, I think really helps
Mm.
to, all right, this is work time, and then that is not when I'm out in my living room or out in my kitchen or outside. And then also doing things that are not audio for fun. So I do like, I really struggle with listening to podcasts because my brain is trying to edit them as
Mhm.
I'm listening. So I have really dialed back the number of podcasts I listen to. Some audiobooks, like you mentioned at the top, I read a lot of books. Most of them are on either my Kindle app or on the Libby app, and I will read paperback. Just started getting into some audiobooks, but had a really hard time listening to them at regular speed
Mm.
because I could hear all the clicks and
Mm.
the breathing and I was like, "Oh my God. My brain is like losing its mind here. This is so difficult to listen to." Because I would edit a lot of that stuff out if my clients, lips are doing weird clicking noises,
Mm.
saliva clicks or whatever.
Mhm.
So I end up listening at like almost two speed for audiobooks, and that has helped a little bit. But for the most part, I don't listen to audio and I don't watch a lot of TV because we do video editing as well. I really just like to read, and doing that in my downtime, I think gives my brain a break of like, this is fun, cool. And
Mhm.
then when
Mhm.
we're listening or we're watching, then it's usually work stuff. So that helps me.
I agree with you completely, and I do the same thing with books. Actually, I edit books, so I'm reading a book. Oh no, this I would have removed this paragraph, and I would have taken it. And the same thing with I do a video editing, and I can't watch movies without wanting to edit the sound or wanting to have this cut be here and that be a fade and da 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 da. And that's one of those things where when you do what you love, sometimes what you love has to change because you can't do it so much
Yeah.
anymore. It definitely takes boundary setting and boundary enforcing. And I appreciate that you're doing that, especially with, when your office is at home, you're in that position of going, oh, I could just go do the dishes. It won't take very, no, 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 no. I'm working right now, even though it's only 20 feet away. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate that you're doing that for yourself. I would like to shift gears a little bit and talk about with this editing, with the work that you're doing, there are subtleties here. Yes, I know that there are the mechanics, the physical, oh, they have a lip smack or they're right now, like this episode, I'm breathing super heavily because I'm suffering through an allergic reaction. However, there are subtleties with respect to the focus of episodes, the sort of the through line of episodes that you pay attention to. How do you train that? How do you train your people to do that so that when your client does the podcast episode, it's obviously very different than when you give them the completed episode, or maybe you upload it yourselves. I'm not sure exactly how the mechanics of that work. How do you focus on those subtleties and how do you use those subtleties to elevate each episode?
Yeah. So we don't do a ton of rearranging. We try to keep the conversation still very similar to how it was originally,
Mm.
with edits to make sure that it gets the point across quicker.
Mm.
So with that in mind, if you listen to a podcast, especially more hobby podcasts, you'll notice that if they ask a question or if the host asks a question, when the guest responds, they'll say, "Oh, that's a good question. We cut that out. Like, that doesn't need to be there. It doesn't add value." Or if the host responds, "Oh, that's such a good answer." Like, people say that so much and they don't even realize how much they actually say it. So we'll
Hmm.
cut those types of things. Or, like I said, if the guest goes off on a side tangent or the host goes off on a side tangent that isn't exactly relevant to where they're taking the conversation, we cut those out just to make sure that it is getting the point across.
Hmm.
Because the majority, and this is just a numbers thing, most listeners actually don't get through 75%. That's where usually they cut off, is 75% of the episode. And so, how can we make sure that we are not only keep getting their attention in the first 5 minutes, but keeping their attention, especially for those longer episodes, the ones that are 45 an hour, even longer. So we try to keep that in mind and just the flow of the conversation, also coaching our clients on how to get into the conversation quicker, less of the banter, less of the green room type stuff, how to separate that a little better. And if they do have green room stuff in there, like we have one client where she'll just start recording as soon as the guest gets on. They go over housekeeping together for the episode. They'll talk about what to expect, where they want to take the conversation. That's like 10 minutes. We'll take it out because obviously it's not for the listeners, but it's recorded in there. So that one would look a little different. But I hope that answers your question. We pretty much keep it the same, but just taking out the things that really just don't add value
Hmm.
to that context of the conversation.
Yeah, I completely understand. And it's interesting because, for example, in this show, the first few minutes are always a little bit of time getting to know each other and finalizing details, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not ever recorded, but what I've heard from my clients, or not my clients, my guests, is that they appreciate the time being made to feel comfortable. For example, your client has a podcast,
Yeah.
they're interviewing someone else, and that person might be nervous. What do you
Mhm.
suggest to your clients that they do to help their guests overcome that nervous? Not the clients, but the guests themselves. Do you have any tips or tricks for that?
Yeah, we will coach our clients on kind of a checklist of things to go through with the guest.
Hmm.
First and foremost, letting them know that the conversation will be edited. Just that simple piece will put a lot of people at ease because they realize, oh, okay, so if I pause to think about something or if oops, I didn't mean to say that, then that's going to be taken out and that's okay.
Hmm.
Even whether it's in the moment or if it's something that they think about after the fact of like, oh, I wish I hadn't said that way. Could you
Hmm.
take it out? Like we've had that happen. So first and foremost, the conversation will be edited. Second, having that green room chat of we're not recording yet. Is there anything that you do not want me to cover? Here's the direction I'd like to take the conversation. Is there anything you don't want me to cover as we get there? We also have some clients where they will actually have a pre-chat. So they will have 15 minutes, totally separate day where they'll talk to that person who's going to be on their show, really nail down where they want to go with the conversation more collaboratively, which I really like. And so those conversations always end up being very flow and very great, but not everybody has space for that, right? So if you are someone that's like, look, I'm just going to schedule this time, letting them know what to expect, where you want to take the conversation, double checking that that's okay with the guest who's going to be talking, and then letting them know if they're like time frame too, I think really helps. So like, hey, if you have anything you want to promote at the end, or if you have anything going on, this episode will air around this time. And that kind of helps people realize, okay, this is where I'm at in my life now. Here's where I'm kind of going. I can tease that or I can let people know that. And maybe they'll hold me accountable to it, or maybe it'll help me feel better about doing the thing. And so giving them kind of some context, I think really helps. And so we guide our clients to do those things and also to make sure they press record because that is something that they have forgotten as well.
Oh, yeah. We were just on one of the podcasting forums, I forget which one, we were just talking about the dumbest things we've done. And that's one of them. You have this phenomenal episode. Oh, I'm so excited. And never recorded it. And so that's why
Yeah.
I usually have double redundancy on things like this because things get lost, life happens. But it is interesting to me. This kind of, it's very personal. The work that you're doing is very personal with your clients. In other words, you're coaching them and you're guiding them to have these conversations or to tell their stories, specifically if they're doing solo episodes, in a way that's going to reach people and say serve and sort of provide value to their audience. But there's also stuff that you're doing that doesn't really, these people aren't your clients, and you're still out there and doing things and offering to people who aren't your clients all sorts of information that's going to help them start, for example, if they want to, or make progress if they're already doing it. Can you talk a little bit about some of the stuff that you're doing to help people out in the podcasting world that may not even be your clients yet?
Yeah. Yeah, this has been something that I've wanted to do for quite some time. When I started Galati Media, I knew values wise, I need to make a living and my team needs to make a living. And so that led me to really identify my clients as those higher ticket clients or, more money per month clients. And so it was really important that I was doing that first. Once we got to a point where our systems were in place, our processes were super clear and clean, the team knew what they were doing. I mean, we meet twice a week, and most of the time it's just like check in to make sure everybody's good and moving on. So once we got to that point, I knew that I wanted, especially as someone who cares about being able to amplify voices, I understand that not everyone has the money to be able to afford to work with me, whether that's in a strategy only capacity or a full service capacity. So, how can I serve them, give them all of this knowledge that I have to be able to help them make a difference with their show or amplify their show? And so I started offering a different podcast for myself. So I have my Listeners to Leads, which is a guest one where I have people on my show pretty much to show that there's not only one way to podcast. And then I have my solo episodes, which are 10 minutes or less, answering podcasting questions and really going hard with the very extensive repurposed content over there. Then offering two quarterly workshops. So one is free and the other one is $27, keeping it very affordable for people that they're, no matter which one you go to, you're going to get value for that topic. And it's on things like how to create a podcast workflow that works right for you, how to market your podcast, especially in a time when algorithms are like, we do what we want,
Yeah.
or how to understand your podcast stats in a way that's going to help you make better decisions for your podcast. And we're looking beyond the downloads. It's not just about the downloads, it's about so much more than that. How are you like, here's my podcast launch roadmap. Let's talk through each of these five or six, I don't remember how many, I think it's five phases of this launch. And by the way, here's a Google Sheet that if you put your launch date in at the top, it's going to rearrange all of the tasks you're going to need to do with due dates. Have fun. Like
Uh-huh.
these are things that we do for our clients, but I've already created them, but they can still support people. So being able to create things that are under $100 for people that are really wanting to DIY it, which is okay, and giving them the resources and the tools as if they were to work with me. Obviously, it's not custom to them or their podcast, but if someone were to take these, they can 100% still get great results with their show.
I am so grateful that you're doing that. That's very cool. So let me totally switch topics for a second and talk to you about books because I do want to get your socials and all of that. But I want to ask you something that is out of left field that has something to do with nothing that we've just been talking about. And that's because I'm fascinated that you read 200 books a year. And before we stop this conversation, I want to talk about that for a second. And I want to know from you,
Yes.
what's a recent book that just swept you off your feet? And what about it made it such an unforgettable read for you?
So I don't remember her last name, and I'm kind of kicking myself in the butt right now for that. But it is The Banned Bookshop by Shonda. Why can't I think of her last name? There we go. Have it at Shauna Robinson. And it's funny enough, that's my maiden name, Robinson. So I don't know how I forgot that. But The Banned Bookshop of Maggie Banks by Shauna Robinson. Now, I am a smut avid. I love smut so much. If there's not some type of sexy time in the book, I'm like, it was okay. This book is very fluff. There's like maybe one scene, and it's mostly fade to black, right? Type of scene. And what I loved about this book, even though there's not a lot of smut, was that it really just showed this idea of society or a town saying, oh, we're not allowed to sell modern books. We're not allowed to sell books in the sci-fi or in the fantasy or anything written after this period. And like a black woman trying to come in and run the bookshop and being like, well, what about everybody else? What about all the new voices? And she didn't even like to read really. And then she kind of created a community of people who came together who were all readers who wanted to read these banned books that were like from this town that nobody in the town was selling because, the authorities at power were saying that they couldn't. And I think what I loved most about it was that I have felt that so much. I remember when I started reading for fun, it was 2020, and I just realized, like, wait, I don't have to read business books. I don't have to read self-development books because I had this expectation that as an adult who runs a business, those are the only ones I was quote unquote allowed to read.
Mm,
And I was miserable trying to make myself read them. And I would maybe get through half a book in a year. But once I started reading for fun and once I started reading genres and books that interested me or had storylines that I was fascinated by, smut, smut or not, I realized that's what the problem was. The problem was not that I didn't like to read or that reading wasn't fun. It was that I was reading the wrong books. And
mm.
so that has really just changed my life. And I just love that this book shows that in such a beautiful way that I felt really, really connected to it.
I need to go read that book, very obviously. That's awesome. Yeah, it's so interesting to me being that we are in information, right? That's what we do. We are these podcasts, the podcasts you do, the podcasts you help your clients with. It's all about the conversation and exchanging information and communicating, which I, as a serious talker who used to have a public speaking phobia, totally appreciate. There are nuts and bolts for this. There are algorithms always changing things. How do you stay on top of it all when you're looking to think about these conversations, but things are coming at you 20 miles a minute as far as the new technology and the new AI and the new this and the new that? How do you maintain your flow to be able to stay on top of it and do the work that you're doing?
Honestly, I could not do it without my team. They have been with me for a few years now. I think I hired my first person in 2021, and they've been with me for that long. So having someone that I can bounce ideas off of, even though, yes, I am the expert, having someone that I can say, hey, this new tool came out. Can we look at it together? Or can you look at it and I look at it? And can we come back together with, does this make sense for our clients and our processes?
Mm,
And I think having that person or those people that I can bounce those ideas off of helps 100%. And additionally, my own podcast, being able to hear what's working for other podcasters and what's not, that has also really opened my eyes. I mean, if you had asked me when I first started Listeners to Leads, if you had asked me, oh, should someone have a limited series? I would have told you absolutely not. You need to be an ongoing show. You need to keep producing. You need to show up consistently. Whereas if you ask me now, I'm like, absolutely, let's do it. If a limited series feels right for you, then do what works best for you. And so I think having those conversations has really allowed me to see there is no one way to do this. And you really have to take the information in, sit with it, don't make any major decisions right away. Sit with it
mhm,
and allow yourself to say, does this make sense for me how I like to work, the way I'm currently working. Do I need to shift that? And like I said, having that additional support to bounce ideas off of really, really helps.
I love that you said that, but now you just answered the next question I was going to ask. So thank you for doing that. You read my mind. Yeah, Alicia, this is so fantastic. And talking to someone who loves podcasting, probably more than I do, is fabulously refreshing. And I adore it. I adore that you do this work and I adore that you help other people tell their stories. And I could keep you here for the next 6 hours, but I know you have a life to get back to. So I will just ask if somebody wants to know more about you and about Galati Media, where should they go to find you?
Yes, you can go to Galati Media, GALATIMEDIA.com is the website. All of our resources and podcasts are over there, as well as if you'd like to book a strategy session or if you want to learn more about what it is to work with us. And then if you want to listen to either of my podcasts, I would love for you to do that. Like I said, Listeners to Leads is on all platforms and is more of an interview style where I talk to other podcasters about what's working and what's not in their podcast and maybe how they're generating leads with their show. And then Successful Podcasting Unlocked is my solo podcast, 10 minutes or less, answering podcasting questions, also available on all of the platforms. And if you want to send me a DM, please, Instagram is the only place I really like to hang out. So send me a DM over there, Alesia.Galati, Alesia.Galati. That is, I will always answer questions. I've sent people 3 minute long voice messages, obviously three in a row because they only allow for a minute, answering their questions over there. And then I very lovingly use them for future podcast episodes. So please feel free. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.
That's awesome. And I appreciate that you do that. I'm going to put all of that stuff, if you're listening to this, I'm going to put all of that stuff plus a few other links in the show notes so that you can get them there. I know people learn differently. So all of that, the Listeners to Lead, Successful Podcasting Unlocked, LinkedIn, Instagram, blah, 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 the website, it's all going to be in the show notes. Alicia, I just have two more questions before I let you go. Do you have time?
I do.
Excellent. So the penultimate question, and these are questions that I ask every single person who comes on the show. The penultimate question is, what is it that gets you up in the morning? And I don't mean your alarm.
I would say my kids, but you know, I have to say what gets me up in the morning is that I really love my life, right? Like I know that
That's
seems like,
awesome.
oh, that's silly, but I really do. I love the phase I am in life right now. I love the age my kids are right now. It's a great age. They're 10 and 7. And I'm just really, I love life. And what I do is so impactful and it's making money and that makes me happy. So, yeah.
That's fantastic. I love it. That's a great answer to that question. What gets me up in the morning is that I love my life.
Yes.
Not many people say that, and I've had a lot of people answer that question. And the last question is this. If you had an airplane, environmentally friendly, of course, that could skywrite anything for the whole world to see, what would you say?
Your voice matters.
That's it. Beautiful,
Yep.
succinct, and awesome. Alicia, thank you so much for joining me on the show. Super excited that you were able to take the time, and I can't wait to have you back. I have like 34 more questions to ask you.
Yes, I would be happy to. And thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
It was all my pleasure. If you've been listening to this, you know you need to go find out more about Alesia Galati and Galati Media. Do it now, do it today, particularly if you want to start your own podcast or want to expand your podcast's reach. As for me, I am Isolde Trachtenberg for the Creative Solutions Podcast. Thanking you so much for being here, for taking the time to listen. Until next time, as always, I remind you to be bold, be creative, and most of all, be kind.
Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to the show if you're new, and it would mean the world to me if you told a friend about it. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright 2024. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope.